know what you're going to see here. Can you see assignment chapter 5 sampling methods? Can you see that yet? Okay, that's good. I just want to make sure I've got all my windows up and running. Okay, we're going to be looking at sampling methods. Before we do that, we're going to look at a few other terms directly connected to sampling. Now, we've met the term population before, so I hope we have. What you might not have heard is what's called the sampling frame. So let's do a story. The population that you're interested in is the opinion of high school seniors on, say, abortion. You know, are they in favour of it? Are they against it? Whatever their opinion is. So you wanted to just collect some opinions on high school seniors and abortion. So we're talking about American high school seniors. That is your population. And you take a sample by using random sample, actually, of high school students at high schools. So you get 1,000 students randomly selected from high schools in America, and you ask them the survey and you get your data. So the sampling frame are the people that you are going to get your sample from. So your sampling frame is the people you are going to get your sample from. That should be the same as the population. Because if it isn't, couldn't you introduce some bias by not having a fair representation of all high school students? So where are the rest of the high school students? Where do they live? Because they're not getting picked here. And some of you might be, or were one of these students. Do all high school students, do all senior high school students go to a physical high school? Where do the others go?
Homeschool.
Homeschooled. Do you see that the sampling frame here would not be asking homeschool students? Because they're only going to go, you know, they're picking randomly students who are at high school, right? Physical high school. You see the difference in the sample frame? Now, if that difference is important, in other words, that the homeschool students are in some way different from the typical bricks and mortar senior at high school, then couldn't your data be biased in some way? Now, I'm making this up, and it's probably the exact opposite of what I'm going to say, but even if it is, it's still a good idea. Can we imagine that maybe there's a large proportion of high school homeschool students who are homeschooled because their parents are more conservative or more religious? Let's just say that's true. It could be the total opposite of that, but let's just say that's true. Wouldn't the opinion on abortion be maybe different for those groups than it would have been for the rest of the high school student parents? And you see your parents very often influence your own opinion, especially at a younger age. You see that could be a problem, can't it? So when you hear the term sampling frame, they're saying these are the people we actually got our sample from, right? And it should be the same as the population. But if it's not, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it can cause problems, right? I'll give you an example of where it probably wouldn't cause problems. Suppose I was interested in their favorite colors. Do you think homeschool students and high school students probably have the same kind of variation in what colors they like and don't like? Yeah, I don't see being taught at home would probably influence that 1 iota, right? As an example, right? So in some cases, it's not a biggie. Okay, very often it's just too difficult to find everybody that you want to ask. And that can be the case. What you hope is that it's not important, that the people you don't get to ask are pretty much like the people you do get to ask. Are we okay with that? With that piece of information, that new guy in town, right? Okay. So next thing I'm going to be doing, must I get all the windows that I meant to have open? I thought I had everyone on. All right, here we go. I'll move this one over here. We are going to look at a lot of different kinds of methods that are used to get samples. Can you see our OC page here, our Canvas page? Okay, now there's a new guy in town. Do you know this guy here called sampling methods? Fingers crossed, I put it on about 20 minutes ago. Hey, it worked. Cool figure. Okay, so what I have here is basically a list of a lot of the different kinds of sampling techniques, and I'm pretty much just going to go over them. Your homework very often gives you a story and then asks you what kind of sample is happening here, or they ask you what might be a problem with the sample that they're using here. So we kind of have to get used to the terms. Right, well, we know what a simple random sample is, isn't that? Where every member of the population has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample. That's like the gold standard of sampling. If you can get a true simple random sample, we're very happy. It's a great thing to do. Here is a list of other kinds of sampling techniques. There's a stratified, cluster, systematic, random, internet panel, multi-stage sampling plan. So here is the basic summary of them. Let's take each one in turn. A stratified random sample, that's the first one. It's collected by first dividing the population or units into what they call strata or subgroups, and then taking a simple random sample from each one of these. Okay, let's see, let me give you an example of how that might work, a stratified random sample. Let's just keep abortion, it's as good a theme as any, right? Let's suppose you are interested in nurses' opinions, right? Nurses who work in hospitals, opinion of abortion, right? Whether, you know, wherever the scale happens to be. Now, the best sample would be a simple random sample, but that might be quite difficult. What would be a little bit easier? Couldn't you probably get a list of every registered hospital in America, right? I bet you there's a government list where that's written down somewhere, right? So you could get a hold of it. Couldn't you then randomly sample 10 hospitals, right? And then for each of those 10 hospitals, couldn't you then take a random sample of, say, 10 nurses from each hospital, right? So that would be one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is get a list of all those hospitals again and pick one from each state, right? A hospital in Alaska and a hospital in New York, right? Pick one from every single state. And then for each of these hospitals, just take a random sample of 10 nurses and ask them. So you see, it's like a two-stage process. First, it's a hospital, right? And you either randomly pick some hospitals or you pick one hospital from each area. You could even do it one hospital from the west of America, one hospital from central of America, one from the south and one from the east. You know, you could do that as your strata, right? And then once you've picked the hospital, you randomly sample within it. Sometimes they don't even randomly sample. When you do this, sometimes what you do is you ask every single nurse in that hospital the question, right? So you send out a blanket survey to all the nurses and hopefully they all answer it, right? So do you get the gist of how that works? It's very difficult to get a real random sample of every nurse in a hospital. That information is very hard to come across, but it's much easier to find hospitals and then random sample within them. Right, here's a cluster sample. The population is divided into clusters. That's another version of subgroups. Rather than sampling within every cluster, a random sample of clusters is selected and only members of these are chosen. And yeah, okay. Here's their example. So you could, for instance, is a group of units that are physically close to each other in some way, such as students living on one floor of a college dormitory or nurses working on the same shift. So there's an example. I'm trying to think of a good story what that would be. Can't think of one. Not right now. Systematic sampling, a very, very simple way of sampling things. Suppose you are interested in finding out people who live in a big street in Bremerton. So there's a big street and there's 500 houses in it, right? And you don't want to ask every single person. A systematic sample would be where you have some kind of systematic way of choosing who you pick. So you might say, I'm only going to pick house number 1, house number 11, house number 21, 31, 41, 51. Do you see? You're picking every 10th house. You could do a systematic sample, which you take everybody in Olympic College's last name and you pick the first person whose last name starts with an A and you ask them the question. And then the first person whose last name ends with a B and you pick that question. See, there's some kind of systematic choice here, right? You're not randomly picking. You've got kind of an order to do it in. You could, for instance, if I wanted to do a systematic sample of everybody in this class, couldn't I just assign you alphabetically number 1 to number 27, right? And then couldn't I just pick numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, just pick every odd person, every odd number. So I'd end up only asking half of you, but there was a system to it, wasn't there? So those kind of ways of doing things are systematic. They can cause problems. I mean, all of the samples I talked about could cause problems. They give an example here. If you are picking a systematic sample, they're saying, look, if you were doing dormitories and you decided, you know, if it was whatever it was 4-story buildings, and in each building you chose only the second floor to ask them about noise, you might get a different answer, you know, because maybe the second floor is the quiet one or it's a noisy one. I'm guessing the 4th floor is the quietest, right? And the first floor is the noisiest. So you could introduce that. If I was doing one of the other samples, like a cluster sample, if I was interested in who's going to win the next election, right? Let's take that as an example, the next presidential election. And I decided that I was only going to pick 4 states, and then I was going to do a random sample in these 4 states. If I picked 4 states that were heavily Democrat, wouldn't I get a biased answer about who was going to win the next election? Or if I picked 4 states that were heavily Republican. So when you're picking your cluster or your strata, you have to be careful about that. Suppose I decided to split people into males and females, old and young, you know, and choose samples using that. Do you know that younger people tend to vote Democrat and older people tend to vote Conservative, right, Republican? So if I'm not careful about that and I only choose old people and not that many young, couldn't I bias my data? So you can screw up things lots of ways. The reason they do them is that they're easier than simple random sample. Simple random sample is very hard to do. Sometimes it's extremely expensive as well. So they figure, workarounds that hopefully work most of the time. Have any of you been a victim of random digit dialing? Just the name, do you know what it is? I know you can read it right now, but if you didn't read it, what do you think random digit dialing is?
Is it like those robocalls that just like pick random numbers?
Yeah. And they phone, and some numbers don't exist, and the ones that do could be you, and you pick up the phone and, hello, would you like to buy a new roof or something, right? But it can be, we're interested in who you're going to vote for the next election and so on. And those robot calls are very often used to advertise things that you don't want to be advertised to you, right?
One time I got a
think
call
there's a
that told me
list.
my social security expired.
Oh,
My
yeah,
social security number, even though those don't expire.
Yeah, you get the phishing ones where they're trying to get information from you. But legal versions of that and non-advertised versions of that are also used. They have a computerized system that basically will randomly pick numbers until there's one that actually exists. And then that one is sent to the operator, and the operator hits a button and it phones you. And then when you go there, they say, hello, we're conducting a survey about who you're going to vote for or what your opinion of abortion is. And that's how they get through to that. There's a lot of problems with the random dialing system now. I think they mention it here. If they don't, they mention it in another place. The number of non-responders to that is extremely high now. Would you agree, most of you, when that phone call happens, hi, we're conducting a survey on so-and-so, you just say, no, I'm not, no, and you put the phone down. Or you just say yes or no just to get rid of them, right?
My phone has an option that says screen call and take a Google transcript, and then I don't even get the call anymore.
Right, and that is part of what their problem is, because what's happening now is a lot of people just block those calls so they never get to see them. Even if the phone number exists, you never get to hear them, or you block it yourself, or you just put the phone down and say, I don't know who that is. And
my phone just says that they're a scam automatically, and just I don't answer them at that point. So
that used to be a technique that was used a lot. It's pretty much died off for all the reasons we've just described here. And it did have problems even when it existed, because if you can phone someone, doesn't that mean they have a phone? That's pretty silly, right? But they do, right? But who are the people you don't get to talk to? Because your sampling frame isn't everybody in America. Isn't it only everybody in America that has a phone? So you're losing out on people who don't have a phone, right, who are probably poor. And so there's a large proportion of the population that never gets asked. So that's sampling bias, as we call it, right? You're under representative groups. So what did they do nowadays? Well, this is a new thing that's coming out. This is a fancy name for it. You may or may not know this name. It's called internet panel sampling. You actually get randomly chosen. And if you accept it, there is very often a payment for it. Have you gone to those sites where you get paid for answering polls? Do you know that site? There's sites out there. You can actually get paid money. In some of them, you get like paid $1. In others, you get paid points. And then those points, once you get enough, become a $15 Amazon card or something. So there are different versions of that. But essentially, you volunteer or are asked to volunteer. And once you take part in that, they very often send you some surveys to answer. And those ones are pretty good at being done, because isn't there an incentive to do them because you get paid in some form or another, right? To take part. And those are becoming the replacement for the robocall things, because they're played out, aren't they? A lot of people just don't want to know about them or even take part in them anymore. So it's a pretty cool thing. And last but not least is multi-stage sampling. And essentially that is just, you do a combination of those techniques. So you might do cluster sample, and then do a simple random sample of your clusters. You know, so you do combinations. Some combinations I don't know how they would work. I'm not quite sure how you do the internet polling one and a systematic sample. Oh, if you've got a list of people who are willing to do it, can you only choose some of the people to do that sample? So you would choose every 10th person on your list who has volunteered to take part in polls. I guess you could do it that way. Any questions about all that stuff? Right. Okay. So you can't, or you shouldn't expect too much in the way of what the questions look like. So if I can find one, oops, stay signed in. Let's see what they ask you. Yeah. Make it a bit bigger. Right, this question is about the government. A local government wants to determine whether taxpayers support an increase in the local taxes so that there's more funding for schools. I think in America, don't you do levies for buildings? But do you do taxes for schools? I'm not sure how your tax system works, to be honest. Anyway, you get taxes.
I think they give them subsidies, which is pretty much that.
Okay.
Like the government gives them money, which the government gets from taxes.
Okay. So there's this tax system, and you can are you in favour or happy to do more taxes to fund the schools? Okay. So what they did is they selected 500 school children and then sent the survey home to their parents. Right. So it's not the kids that filled it in, because kids might say, no, don't fund it. I don't want to go to school. Don't give them any more money. They'll make it open all the year round. So you give it to parents, and hopefully they arrive, and the parents fill it in. Right, so that's the story. That's how they collected information about, are you in favour of increasing the local taxes to get more funding for schools? So what's the population of interest here? There's 5 choices, but who are they really interested in getting that information about?
All local taxpayers.
Agreed. Now, the sampling frame was the people that they asked from. They didn't ask every one of them, right? They didn't give a poll to every kid and say, take it home, right? They randomly selected some kids. But is it the sampling frame only parents of children who are at school? You see, that's the only people that would get asked based on the way they decided that. So that would make it B. Now, as far as homework goes, isn't this going to be pick the right answer? I mean, there's no working. So what's the problem with only asking parents of children who are at school, are you in favour of spending more money on schools?
Because we want to represent all taxpayers, not all of them have children in the school.
And isn't there a fair chance, not a guaranteed chance, that if you don't have parents, children at school, you might not be so much in favour of paying taxes? So one of them best describes what we just said. And since you get 5 guesses and there are 5 choices, you are eventually going to get the right answer, but will you try and do it as a real question, right? Rather than just 1, no, 2, no, 3, oh, I got it right, and then move on. Because when you get questions in your test when I do these questions, I do these as multiple choice. I just give you the same question, but I call it A, B, C, and D, and your answer in the test is C, right? So you do get these questions, but you don't get 5 shots. Here's another one with the same kind of thing going on. And here are some other types of samples. So in each part, indicate whether the sample should be called self-selected or a convenience sample. Right. Self-selected sample, adding it to my list. Self-selected is where the people themselves decide to take part. Can you imagine a radio show where they say, we're interested in your opinion of abortion. Phone this number, dial 1 if you're in favour of abortion, dial 2 if you're not, right? That kind of thing. Who's going to win the next election? Phone this number, dial 1, you know, press 1 if you're a Republican, press 2 if you're a Democrat. Or they may send you to a website where you vote, right? When that radio show tells you that, you're sitting and listening. Don't you choose whether to join in or not, right? You choose to pick up the phone and dial or go to the internet and vote. That's what a self-selected sample would be like, right? The sample that you get back are people who've decided. A convenience sample. Can you imagine that you're in the mall and there's a guy with a clipboard, and every person that walks by him, he says, "Excuse me, I'm interested in asking you some questions. Would you like to answer these questions?" Now, I know part of that is self-selected, but isn't it also convenient? Because it's easy for them, right? A convenience sample is simply a very simple way of collecting data, something that you can do without any real thought or process. You know, you like turn up on the street and just watch the cars go by and register what the colours are, right? You didn't make any conscious decision about what street or what time or anything else. So, to assess passenger satisfaction, an airline distributed questionnaires to 100 passengers in the airline's frequent flyers lounge. All 100 of them responded, and 95 of them said that they had a high degree of satisfaction with the airline. What kind of sample was that?
Convenience.
Yeah, it was easy just to go into that room and say, here you go. Would you agree that the answer they got is probably biased? I think people who are in like the first class lounge, don't they get treated probably a lot better than I do because I go the cheapest way I can. Right, so
Yeah.
my experience of flight might be quite different from theirs. A magazine contains a survey about sexual behaviour, and readers are asked to mail, God, who would ever do that? Mail in their answers, right? Would you agree that's an example of self-selected? It's probably
Yes.
convenience as well, but I think the responses you get aren't they only going to be the people who decide to mail in. So I think it's stronger on one than it is in the other. And of course, I'll probably disagree with the book occasionally. Okay, this is a really good question, but I do not want to do anything on it. You go up there and you click on this, and there's an example of a study that was done by, it's still around, the Reader's Digest. And they did a famous poll in 1936 that got it totally wrong. And you'll be able to maybe read about it. And then they ask you questions about it. So see if you can come up with it. Nah, it's a boring one. Okay, here is question 7. A proposed study design, right? So they're doing a sampling, and they're thinking of doing it this way, is to leave 100 questionnaires by the checkout at the student cafeteria. And the questionnaire can be picked up by any student. And when you fill it in, you just give it back to the cashier. Explain why this volunteer sample is a poor sample. Now, they give a whole load of examples here, and certainly you can read through them. I'm not even going to look at them right now. I'll give you top of my head why it would be a bad one. Depends on what the questionnaire is about, but imagine the questionnaire was about the quality of the food. Now, how good is our food? From a scale from 1 to 5, 1 it's disgusting, to 5, you know, it's gourmet food, right? And probably in a cafeteria, it's not going to be 5, but they give them a choice, right? The kind of people who fill them in are probably going to belong to 2 distinct groups, in my opinion. See if you get the food and the eggs runny and the sausage is cold and the tomato looks like it was 5 days beyond its sell-by date, you're probably going to complain. And won't you complain by going to that questionnaire and writing down your opinion? And at the other end, if you got a really great meal and it was great and you feel happy about it, aren't you likely to maybe take part in the questionnaire? But isn't there a big bunch of people in the middle who it's just normal meal and they're not that interested and they'll probably not bother picking up the questionnaire? You see that the people who answer those questionnaires tend to be at the two extremes. Do you know in HR, in the college, when they receive complaints, do you know that they normally receive complaints? They don't normally get a phone call from a student or a parent of a student saying, Professor Robertson is brilliant. I love him. He's a great guy. Give him more money. Don't most people only volunteer information when they're really annoyed about something? That tends to be a bigger motivation when they're really happy, right? So you tend to get quite a biased sample when you do those things. Oops, got time. Yep, that's a pretty obvious one, I think. Oh, here's one. Medical tests, such as those for detecting HIV, sometimes concern such sensitive information that people do not want to give their names when they take the test. Okay, so you go into a clinic and they're, you know, an HIV test and they say blah, blah, blah. Well, you might say, oh, I'm John Brown, right? You just don't want whatever. In some instances, a person taking such a medical test is given a number or a code so that they can use it later to learn what their test result is. So if they know that that's going to be an important issue, they won't ask you for your name. They'll say, okay, your code is A427. So if you go online, you just need to look at A427 and it'll tell you HIV positive or negative, right? And so you can get the information totally anonymously. Right? Explain whether this procedure is an example of anonymous testing or confidential testing. I'll be honest with you, I have never heard either of those two terms. So you tell me what the answer is.
Is it the fourth one?
Let's find out. Confidential testing, because although the researcher has the person's name, they can only release a number or a code. Yeah, I would go with that one. Let's see if I can knock the others down just in case there's two right answers, or two answers that could be right. Confidential testing, because the researcher does not know the result of the test. Yes, he does, right? He's got 200 people who've tested, and he knows, you know, 42 were HIV test positive and the others didn't. So he does know the results. So I'm kicking that one out. It's confidential testing because the test concerns sensitive information. And I could go for that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not sure if it's right. I still like 4 better. Anonymous testing because the test results are not linked to the person's name. Well, they are actually indirectly linked to it because the name has a code and then the code is what they use. Not sure I'd use that one. And the last one is anonymous testing because the person taking the test won't know the results until a later date. I don't know why that would be anonymous. So I'm about to find out what question 9 is.
I don't think it would be the sensitive information because it could be not sensitive information and be the same situation.
Let's find out. I've chosen their little tick thing and they're going to tell me they are picking it as 3. So anonymous testing because the test results are not linked to the person's name. So at the beginning, they don't even care what your name is. They say, you're going to be A42C. So when you look up online, that's the one that you look for to find out if you have HIV. Interesting.